call the member for Dawson and just remind him that Doctor Who says bow ties are cool, and I'm surprised you haven't got one on this morning. But anyway.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
Call for a seconder. Thank the member for Mitchell. The member for Dawson.
Well, firstly, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for actually calling on for me to bring the prop for the purposes of Hansard. I'm wearing a large Tom Baker scarf. I also thank the member for Mitchell, the members for Morton and Fraser for speaking on this motion, which is one, I hope, of bipartisan support, given the fans across the chamber. But look, 50 years ago, this Saturday, there was two historical events that actually occurred. The first was the tragic news of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The other one was the first screening of the British Broadcasting Corporation science fiction series Doctor Who. A bit of trivia, the first screening of Doctor Who was actually delayed by the news of the President's death at the time. It was marketed as an educational show. The first story, being called An Unearthly Child, introduced us to the Doctor, as he's called, not Doctor Who, as traditionally thought. The Doctor, he was an old, gruff, eccentric man who was in fact an alien being to our planet. We were also introduced to his granddaughter and two of his school teachers who were whisked away in this strange blue police box to the year 100,000 BC, where they interacted with some cavemen, and that was hence the educational sort of aspect of the show, that we would go into time looking to see what happened in the past. In fact, that strange blue police public call box was actually a machine that travelled in time and space, anywhere in fact throughout time and space. And the very next story took them to an alien planet, Skaro, where they met the Daleks for the first time, and they became almost synonymous with the show, and that happened, that's to this very day, and in fact probably made the show what it is, because it scared the hell out of a lot of kids throughout Britain and elsewhere. For 5 decades, the show Doctor Who has enthralled audiences right across the world, particularly in the Anglosphere, and Australia being one of those countries where the enthralment has occurred. Now, there's been a lot of links between Doctor Who and Australia that people aren't aware of. In fact, I've left out a crucial link in the motion that I want to state from the outset, and that link is that one of the architects behind the show's concept was a fellow by the name of C.E. Bunny, as they called him, Webber. And C.E. Bunny Webber helped with Verity Lambert and Sidney Newman, the other two people behind the show, to come up with the entire concept for Doctor Who. He was an Australian, and he actually came up with the plot of the first story, which was then written in full by another Australian, Anthony Coburn. So the very concept of Doctor Who was helped form by an Australian, the very first episode of Doctor Who written by an Australian. More than that, the famous theme tune, the dum-de-dum, dum-de-dum, that actually... I won't go further, Member for Morton, but sing it. I could if you want, but we've only got 10 minutes. Now, look, that was actually written and composed by an Australian, Ron Grainer. So that's absolutely fantastic, the fact that there's so many links between our country. But it hasn't actually stopped there. As is outlined in my motion, there are plenty of actors actually that have links there. Janet Fielding, she is an Australian herself. She played an Australian character in the TV show, playing opposite both Tom Baker, but mainly Peter Davison, who portrayed the Doctor at the time during the 1980s. There is Katie Manning, who actually went on to become an Australian citizen. She was married to Barry Crocker, and she played the character Jo Grant back in the 70s, opposite the Doctor as portrayed by John Pertwee. The member for Mitchell actually told me to add this. This is an interesting bit of trivia. The Australian horse racing icon, our Melbourne Cup winner, Gay Waterhouse, portrayed the character of Presta in the Doctor Who episode The Invasion of Time, again in the 70s, opposite Tom Baker. And more recently, Australian pop star Kylie Minogue has played the character of Astrid in the new series, opposite the Doctor is portrayed by David Tennant in the Christmas special Voyage of the Damned. So there is this myriad of connections between this show and our nation. In fact, actually, one thing I neglected to mention about Anthony Coburn, not only could he be credited for writing the first story, but in fact it is believed that Coburn's idea was for the TARDIS to resemble a police box simply because he saw one in the street outside his office when he was actually writing the story and thought, what a nifty British institution to actually put in this show. So many connections between Australia and this show, both behind the scenes, but in the actual series itself. Sadly for us, I think it's sometime in the year, 200,100 AD that we actually get wiped out by the Daleks. So that's something to look forward to in the future. But seriously though, all of this culminates in what I think is a good request to the BBC to consider bringing Doctor Who to Australia. Now, in the year 2015, we will mark our 50th anniversary of the show first appearing on Australian screens, 15th of January 2015. That is an opportune point in history that the BBC could actually bring Doctor Who down under, just as they have taken it over to the US, just as they've taken it to many places throughout Europe. They could take Doctor Who to Australia. Now, there has been some support from that at the very top. In fact, Doctor Who producer, one of the executive producers, Carolyn Skinner, actually was asked a question over in London late last year, and she says that she would consider it, not obviously for the next series, but it would be something in the future. She was actually accompanied by the current Doctor Who, Matt Smith at the time, who said he thought it would be pretty cool to actually come to Australia and do the filming. Now, recently there's been an interview with the main man, the chief executive producer, Stephen Moffat, who sort of said, well, maybe we could, maybe not. Australia's pretty similar to the UK in terms of its settings, but I've got to say, imagine the TARDIS landing near the Sydney Opera House, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Australian outback, Uluru, Ayers Rock. Think of all of the exotic locations we could have, and there's a little bit of vested electoral... Canberra, in fact, certainly an exotic location for many Australians. But there is a bit of vested electoral interest in this, in that I would hope that if we are able to secure something like that, that they could bring the TARDIS to the Whitsundays, where we've had experience before in filming major Hollywood motion pictures, and also the great Baz Luhrmann film Australia. So that's one of my hopes. But really, I just want to say, in the lead up to this 50th anniversary of Doctor Who, there are so many connections between this show and this nation that I think that Doctor Who is as much an Australian institution as it has been a British institution. In the lead up to this debate, there's been lots of MPs that have actually approached me telling me the same thing over and over. When they were a kid, they used to hide behind the couch or build cushioned fortresses to protect themselves from whatever was on the screen. And they loved the show, and they remembered it fondly like that. Well, now with the new series, a whole new bunch of, a new generation of children are learning the same thing, and it's great to have that show still on the air. It's great to have the Australian connection with it, but I think a greater Australian connection could come if they actually filmed a series of it down under. I'm really hopeful that they will do that. There's precedence for the ABC actually contributing. They did for the 20th anniversary, put some money into it, and I would encourage, as the motion states, the ABC to consider that. Organisations like Screen Australia and other film funding and tourism bodies throughout the states, the different states here in Australia. If we can jag this, it will be of an immense benefit to both the art world here in Australia and also tourism. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank